comparison's funny too, because I think sometimes we find purpose in one thing and then we're trying to find purpose in another thing, and we're comparing, oh, well, I felt more purpose when I was doing this thing than I do in purpose in doing this thing now, this new thing. And it's like, well, now that's why you can't make this the point, because you're comparing it to the other thing. Like, but remember, when you did the other thing, you didn't have anything to compare it to, so that's why it was the point. This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Exploring the challenges of the creative call
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
Okay, welcome to the show. We're doing a not so serious. This means that we just jump into it. We didn't really discuss what's going on. But I will say that Evan and I went for a nice hike the other day, and we talked about a lot of stuff. We hiked about 8 kilometers into the woods, took our time, stared out at the lake for a while, had some deep conversations. I'm sure some of that will probably come into this. So I don't have a title for you, and I don't necessarily have a topic. It's something we're going to discover along the way. As far as, I don't know, what's standing out for me, just from kicking this off, is something that I've been thinking a lot about recently, and I guess I've been working on with clients and stuff, is how we use our past sometimes to try to figure out who we are. And although that makes sense to some degree, I actually find it's more of a limit than it does help you. For example, I'll often hear people say, oh, I always do this, or, this never happens for me. It's like, it becomes this story, this narrative about you and who you are and how your life works. And I don't know, Evan, I guess the idea I want to suggest just from the start is like, what if your life just began right now? And what if you couldn't remember anything that ever happened in the past, and you just were like, here, you just woke up and you're like, this is my life. Who would you be? How would you know? And it kind of begs the question of, are we actually tied to our past? Do we actually have to carry that with us? Or could we just let it go and be free and then totally just pivot and change direction in a moment? I think we can. I do think it's challenging sometimes. I do think there are well-worn habits, and I do think there's inertia and a momentum that sometimes we're kind of going in a certain way. And it can be kind of like turning a massive ship sometimes. But in some cases, I think it can be as simple as literally, some things I think you can literally just change. I think you can literally just decide, okay, I'm doing it this way from now on. And then from then on, it's just a different thing, and you're like a different person that way. So anyway, that's something that I've been chewing on since our talk. And I pass it to you.
Well, I think that, it's you're diving into some pretty big stuff, I feel like, right off the top, which is great. I think that, I've certainly read and listened to a lot of very wise people, wiser than myself, who have communicated this message of essentially, like, you have to die to yesterday. And for most of us, we have to learn how to do that, right? Because we get so caught up in the things of yesterday and the sort of the metaphorical yesterday as it extends and extends and extends, because that's where we at least we believe that we find who we are. We believe that who we are is all in the stuff that happened before, which is kind of a crazy thing to think about, because, well, at some point there was nothing that was before. It was all in front of you. It was all happening now and in the moment. But as we get older, it's like we start to grab on to certain experiences and hold on to them, like, this is who I am, right? And that can be problematic, as many people have pointed out And because it does have a limiting capacity to it. It can limit it limits us as being creative human beings, because we say like, well, I'm this, so I can't do that, or this, like it can create a lot of confusion just because it's what we're familiar with, right? And even if there's something that's right in front of us that we would really genuinely like to do, we feel genuinely compelled and called to go to something, but it doesn't fit with that old model, so we just will shut it down. And that can go from small things to really big things, in terms of what you choose as your vocation in life on the big side of it, to just doing something really small, like, oh, I can't go and jump in that lake right now. Right? Well, why not? Right? Oh, I don't know. Because, like, it's just, we can, and I'm speaking, some of these are from my own, from my own mind and my own observations of events that have occurred, where it's just like, oh yeah, why am I stopping myself from doing this thing right now? And yeah, it can prevent us from that alive presence with life, which is so often, and maybe most often, a better guide to us than if we're keeping an eye on this sort of past idea that we have. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I suppose there's something about permission that's coming up for me. It's like, I mean, how often do you not give yourself permission to do something because of something that, something built upon the past, or something just built upon your idea of what something is? Like, I don't know, like putting your feet in the water. There's times where, like, I'll go down to the beach and then, and I don't put my feet in the water. It's like, especially like during like spring or fall, winter, definitely not, but that's understandable. But then spring and fall, you have these nice days, and you're like, it's been kind of cold, and I have to take off my boots, and then I have to do this, and I have to do that. And it becomes this kind of like, you just become weighed down by all this stuff that you would have to do. And I feel like the past and the way we look at ourselves is like that. It's just all this stuff that weighs us down. It's like, the last time I did that, it didn't work out, and this is what happened, and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, yeah, you can remember like how it worked out last time, or, it could be different this time, And I think, I think there's like something else coming up is like shame and guilt. How sometimes the past, you like feel ashamed that you made a mistake, or guilty about something you did or whatever. And so you don't like let yourself off the hook to like be free to do it again. And, I think there's I do think part of getting older, there's something about wearing your mistakes like some type of clothing. You're just wearing them around, and you walk around with them as though they're a part of you, and they're just not. Like, you can just take it off. Like, you could just like drop it, And the other word that was coming up for me as I was thinking about this as you were talking, I was like, perfectionism has a lot to do with this too, because it's like, if you want to be perfect all the time and you always want to get it right. I was talking with one of my clients actually just the other day, and we were talking about this, and I'm like, look, whatever you do, you're gonna suck at it in the beginning. If like anything, like, I mean, I went up for a ride on my motorcycle today, and I'm riding around the corners at like 120 kilometers an hour, like basically one hand on the wheel. I'm just like calm, cool, just not a problem. When I started, I mean, just kind of going 30 kilometers straight was freaky. Like, I don't know how to explain that. Like, you're going around a corner on a highway, like a windy road that's actually kind of even a blind corner, and you're just calm, cool, collected. You know what the bike can do. You know what you can do. You know what you're capable of. And then when you're learning, you're you're going down this just like in a parking lot, you're like going like 20 kilometers an hour, 30 kilometers an hour, and that feels fast. That feels freaky. And so there's a certain quality to, you kind of got to almost like wear what works for you and like let go of what doesn't, And I think you could make, like, you could start to learn something and you could make some mistakes early on, and then you can be like, I always make mistakes. And it's like, you're learning. But why is it you that makes mistakes? Why can't it just be that when I was learning, I made a few mistakes? Like, but people don't always phrase things that way. I've noticed, I just, something that I've noticed a lot is this, the way people talk about themselves. Another client, this was actually years ago, but this was a good one. And it was like, we were talking about like, who are you? What's your story? Blah, blah, blah. And this person was like, I'm a planner. And they're like, I am a planner. I plan things. I do this. And we were like, okay. And I would challenge them on that thought. I'm like, it's like, so you've planned before? you've done planning like often? Like, yeah. Like, so you are this thing that you've done a lot. It's like, and eventually they kind of broke away from that. They were like, oh, and I was like, well, I mean, because they're a planner based on what they think is a lot of planning. But I was like, and we kind of did an exercise and we talked about how somebody is actually more planned than they are. And it's like, well, are they a planner? And then in context to them, are you not a planner? Like, where does the planner begin and end? Like all this, right? And it's just a funny thing, because you go, well, like if you say like, I'm not good enough compared to what? Because like there's certain things that you might be better than, and there's certain things you might not be as good as. But like, why does the world revolve around you? Why are you the not good enough center of the earth? Why can't not good enough exist way before where you are and now you're actually good enough? Like, what are you comparing yourself to? And also, did this comparison always begin there? Like, I remember first being in acting class and it's like, yeah, I just want to like be able to keep up with everybody. And then, eventually it goes down the line and you're like, hey, I got to like, you're comparing yourself to like Denzel Washington or like William Dafoe or some like incredible actor that's like super successful. And you're like thinking, oh man, I can never do what they can do. And it's like, yeah, because you just keep raising the bar. But if you keep raising the bar and you keep putting yourself below it, of course you're going to experience yourself as not good enough, because you just keep making it unattainable to ever be good enough. And that's all just a story. It's all just this like mental gymnastics we do to actually hold ourselves down. So I don't know, like I guess what I'm kind of interested in is like, how do we, like, what are actual effective ways to free ourselves from these mental constraints that seem to actually limit us more than they help us?
Well, I think that the seed of the solution might be in something that you already said, like compared to what? The whole comparison thing, which is really, you could argue that that's one of the main things that the intellect does. You could, or even is, like the intellect to a large degree is a thing of comparing things. Let's hold this thing up to this thing. Mm-hmm. What are the differences? What are the similarities? Da 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 da. Right? Very powerful and useful mode of being able to, I don't know, comprehend the world. And again, we had a podcast a while back on like, I can't remember what we called it, but I know mesmerized was in the title of that one, and how that the power that intellect that we possess has is very, it produces very tangible kinds of results, right? And as such, we're kind of like, we get kind of wowed by this capacity and forget a lot of other ones. But there are drawbacks to when that becomes your, like, pretty much how you're always just going about in the world, because everything's a comparison and a judgment, a comparison and a judgment. And it's not that that's not useful, because as you're saying, like, you're talking about if you want to be an actor and you see some fantastic actor, whether it's in a movie or on stage or whatever it is, and you just go, holy shit, I'm not there, right? I can't do what that person is doing. And, for a lot of us, that acknowledgement comes with a sense of guilt and shame, because you're just like, oh, well, what's the point? And just, you turn it as a thing of like really just shitting on yourself, as opposed to, wow, look at what they did, and being inspired to go further in your own work, not to try and be what they are, right? We don't need someone out there trying to act like Willem Dafoe does, right? Like, but using that to inspire yourself to go further and deeper into your craft and figure out what makes you tick in a way, right? What are the things that make you come alive when you perform and you're on stage? Because that's unique, to you. And that's such a personal journey, not just in acting, but for any artist in whatever their discipline is. Like, your way of finding your expression and your voice is always going to be totally unique, and how you do it best, is going to be different from somebody else, and it's going to be different. It's constantly changing too. Even your own process is always being refined and adapting and things like that. It's never just a solid, oh, okay, yeah, it's here, I figured it out now. It's like, no, that's always moving too. It's always moving, but you do start to figure out, I don't even know how to describe it necessarily, like, because it's not even necessarily technique at a point, like you just start to figure out a way in which you're approaching things that gives you the place to play, right? And it still somehow brings out like a consistent sort of thing from you. But anyhow, I feel like I'm getting a little bit sidetracked there. Comparison and the judgment, right? Like that's I think that's part of that thing that gets in our way, right? Because it can turn inward in a really nasty kind of way, right? Even, because like and I understand it, because there's that sort of, I guess, wisdom of don't compare yourself to others, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, right? And did you do better yesterday? But I mean, I think that like there's some truth and wisdom to that, but I think even that can get dicey, because, it's like, I think of like Napoleon Dynamite, or like, you remember the uncle, who comes in to like look after them, and he's just living in that thing when he like that high school football game where he's just like, the coach throwing me in, could have gone state. Like we could have gone state. Like it's like you're here you are comparing yourself to who you are yesterday, and it's like I've never thought about about this, and this says I got to rewatch Napoleon Dynamite now, because that's a brilliant kind of character study in a way, because it's like, here's a guy who's comparing himself to who he was when he was younger and whatever, and it's completely crippled him in his life. Like he hasn't moved on. He can't move past it. And so, yeah, there can be traps there as well. And so in a sense, it's like, that whole comparison game is pretty suspect, especially when it comes to how we are thinking and feeling about ourselves, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you bring up some good points here. I think this whole comparison to yourself, it has landmines in it. And I think there is a wisdom in don't compare yourself to others, compare yourself to who you were yesterday. But I don't always think that's a relevant comparison either. I think that is problematic. And actually, before you brought that up, that's what I was thinking as well. So it was kind of nice that you did, And I was thinking, you know, I look at how I rode my motorcycle today. I went out for a pretty big ride, and it was probably one of my best outings. I'd say I definitely pushed the bike to some limits that I hadn't pushed, and I was comfortable. I was like, wow, this is good. But the other day, like, we've had a really nice week, and the other day it was a really nice day. And, it's like, that kind of saying, like, never waste a nice day, like, go out and do the things in life. And honestly, I woke up that morning, like this morning, not this morning, but the morning of this ride, and I was groggy, and I just wasn't sharp, and I didn't feel really good. And one of the things they say about motorcycle riding is before you ever go out on your bike, especially if you're thinking about doing a ride, just check in. How do you feel? What's going on? What's your sense of things? And I kind of gave myself a self-assessment, and I'm like, I don't feel ready to like go out and push corners at high levels, and I feel kind of groggy. I just don't feel sharp. And I had to run an errand, so I was going to get on my bike, and I felt comfortable enough to do errands. It was like, well, I'll just ride down to the beach. I'll do my errands. I'll ride down to the beach at one point. I'll sit and watch the sunset. I'll just, just chill, cruise, enjoy, it was a little windy too. And like sometimes when the wind picks up, it also, you have to be on the ball a little bit more. And anyway, if you compared me to that ride, I looked terrible probably in comparison. Like I was really not riding well, but I was safe and I was doing what I needed to do. And I think comparing yourself to how you did last time isn't always accurate. Sometimes it's not about always being better. One thing that I encountered, and this was several years ago, and ever since this, I've been very adamant about the personal growth, personal development, self-help market, because it's a big thing in our world right now. You don't always need to improve yourself. And if you believe you do, it enforces the opposite idea, which is that you don't believe that you're enough. Like you believe something has to be improved. You believe something has to be fixed. At a certain point, I realized you should accept yourself as complete and whole, and everything you need to be right now is all you need to be. And yeah, it's great to improve. It's wonderful to improve. It's awesome to learn a skill and develop a skill, but you don't have to do it. You're still enough as you are. Like, and I think there's this, and I hear these people like, you got to be better. You got to wake up at 4 a.m. and you got to go to sleep at 1 a.m. and you get 3 hours of sleep. And if you're sleeping any more than 3 hours, you're sleeping too much. And it's just like, it's just like, holy shit, fucking relax. Like, calm down. I know this is your marketing. Like, this isn't real. You're full of shit, And this self-help thing, I think it's kind of gotten into our culture because a lot of people still carry these beliefs in themselves that like succeeding and making money and falling in love and all of that is all based on being better, performing, getting more and more and more. And it's just not fucking true. It just isn't fucking true. And when I think about this, we sometimes exclude ourselves from things because we go, well, I don't have enough money, or I haven't succeeded enough yet to have that. And it's like the bullshit. You could have that now. You don't have to get these things. You don't have to be this person to get this stuff. There's a lot of stuff that's very accessible, and you don't have to become somebody, and you don't have to be better than you are. You simply, like, a lot of things you can have by simply just doing very basic shit that you could do right now, like show up. You know how many people just don't show up? You know how many things that I fucking have, how many doors I've opened and how many things that I've gotten? And people say, oh, you're lucky, Brandon. You're just lucky. The reason why I'm not lucky, I just show up. And you know how many times people just didn't show up and I was the only one there? And then I'm like, it's like collect the lottery ticket. You're the only one that bought one. It's like, okay, great. You win. It's like, there's so much of life that's just show up. Even at your worst, just show up. Don't worry about being anybody. And you know what? You might be like literally 10 times worse than you are at your best day. But a lot of the time, you just have to have a mentality of like, I'm just going to show up. I'll give it the best that I have today. And, and the best you have today, like compared to who you were, is not very good. But it's better you showed up than you didn't show up at all. And so I'm kind of just running on this idea of comparison. It's like, because comparison can get us not to show up. That's my point, right? It's like, well, I'm not going to perform as well as I should, so I'll just won't do it. And it's like, no, just fucking show up. You know, it matters. You matter. And I think that people don't always realize that. And I think there's a lot of story that goes around these things that limit us. Yeah. Comparison, man. I think you're really onto something. I think, but what I like about this, the way we're talking about it, is we're talking about it in the less obvious ways. Because I think people mostly know, don't compare yourself to others and, all that stuff. That's the more obvious comparison. But it's that little comparison, which is like, I won't do it as well today, so I might as well not do it. It's like, no, that's a comparison that's limiting.
Feel like I like the can of worms that you're opening up here. There's something about when you talked about that figure's like, you gotta get up this time. And it's like, and you gotta be going to the gym at least this. It's like how many times are we trying to live up to other people's standards and people who don't even know. It's like sometimes maybe it's not even a person that we like, but they just seem like we think that they're, a person that we're supposed to be more like. And, when you're constantly thinking about that, it's hard to see yourself for the person that you are, and for the things that you need to be, the most creative version of yourself too. Right. I think that sometimes that, like we kind of have this, in the background of our minds, sometimes the comparison is just like this, what's the word for it really? But it's like, we're all trying to somewhere within us, we're all trying to be like billionaire Superman. It's like, I've got to have all of this stuff, and I've also got to be fit, and I've got to have it all together, and I've got to like that you mentioned perfectionism, and how many of us, are just constantly tearing ourselves down because of all of these ideas we have about who and what we're supposed to be, and where those ideas even came from sometimes don't even get questioned, right? And there was another part of, and I think this is all related, because this was something that, coming into this conversation, was something that I was interested in potentially getting into. But while we were also on our hike, we were talking about this thing about progress and regress, right? And how progression and regression are irrelevant, right? And I was thinking about this, and it's not that progression and regression don't necessarily have a kind of reality or potential reality to them, but that I think that our notions and ideas of preconceived notions and ideas of progress and regress are completely irrelevant, right? And I think that has a lot to do with what we're talking about, because how do you measure progression and regression other than through comparing certain things, right? And part of when we were chatting about this is that, well, there's so much we just don't know as individuals and collectively together. There's just so much that we don't know. We don't know how this action is going to affect something that happens down the line over here or whatever, but it does, right? And this presents a problem for our ideas of progress and regress and what that all means, because it doesn't take in account so many of our present experiences and realities. Like in fact, it robs us of a lot of those things. And came out of that conversation was that really, like, it always has to come down to, well, what do I want, like what am I doing now? Right? What am I doing now? Like, forget whatever I did before, whether something failed or succeeded or whatever it was. Just doesn't matter. What is the thing now that you're creating? Right? Like, in many ways it is that simple, in terms of in terms of living a life, not even necessarily as an artist, right? But like, just living is a creative thing, and you are creating through your life, inadvertently maybe, and maybe more directly. But it's like, if you can just be like, well, what am I doing right now? What's the thing I'm creating right now? Casting aside any sort of comparisons to anyone, including yourself, actually opens up the space for you to actually know where you want to go and what you want to do. And you can then look back at whatever the thing it was that you did, and you can assess only sort of like post-mortem as like, oh yeah, there was progress in something here, or you know what, that actually, took us a step back over here. It's like, oh, okay. And you can take that, and it's like, okay, well, but now what's the thing that I'm doing now? Right? Because that keeps you from getting like too high on yourself and too low on yourself. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, you never really gonna, because there can be a trap with like getting really high on yourself too, right? Because now you got to constantly live up to this thing. I remember Elizabeth Gilbert, and I think it was in her book Big Magic, where she talks about, after she wrote Eat, Pray, Love, and it gets turned into a movie and all this stuff, and she had, I as far as I remember the story, like, she had, not just friends and family, but strangers and other people who just said like, hey, like how are you gonna like write your next book? Like, cause like, there's this thing of like, it's gotta be bigger, it's gotta be better, it's gotta be, and she's just like, holy shit, like how, like that's too much. How are you supposed to do anything with that kind of pressure post success? Right? Like, that's a dangerous place to be, right? Because the only thing that you can do is like, okay, well, what is the thing that I'm excited, I'm passionate, I have fire about doing right now? That's the only thing that you can do. And whether it's people think it was better or worse or whatever, even if you think it was better or worse, it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant to what you're doing right now. It has to be. And, I'll the last thing I'll say on this is, this is one of the things that I learned about acting, which is like, oh yeah, all of my preconceived ideas of what this is I have to completely throw them out. Like, I have to, as best as I can, forget them as much as I can and just be present and listen to the other people I'm doing, the scene with. Because otherwise I'm just like, I'm completely off in my own world. I'm not being truthful and responsive to reality, to like what is actually like the only thing that's actually going on for sure, which is right now. Yeah. Right? Like, and if I'm not fully able to respond to that thing, then what the hell am I responding to? What the hell am I, where am I even creating from at that point?
Man, there's so many moments that I'm like, okay, I want to talk about this, I want to talk about that, and they're all gone. I don't remember any of them, but I think we got to the most important point, which I love that you got to at the end here, which was that this is the only thing that's happening right now, this moment. And I don't know if we all live like that's true, but it is true. This is all that there is. There is like whatever you think is happening in the past is not happening. And I was thinking about comparison, like in acting. Sometimes you'll do this scene where you knock out this great scene. Like last week, we fucking nailed it. And then it's like you come back the next week and it's like, okay, we got to do that again. And it's like, you're fucked. It's not happening because the moment you compare yourself to the last performance, this moment is just totally ruined. And the thing is that it's not even really relevant. All that really matters is that you're true in this moment, and what worked about that moment before in the week before when you kind of knock it out of the park is usually it's because you're really true in the moment. But the problem is that you remember being true in the moment and you go, oh, that was a good moment. I want to make sure I bring that back in. And it's like, it doesn't work like that. You don't just get to bring it back in because you don't know if that moment's going to actually happen that way this time. It might, there's little nuances. And when you're really listening to someone in an acting scene, you find out that like it just comes out a little bit different. And you got to be responsive to it. And what I found was very interesting about acting is like, this even happens between takes. Like you're literally just did a take and then you do another take. And what happens is sometimes the actor, they say one line differently and that beat is not as good seemingly, but then the next beat, fucking awesome. Because in some ways, you don't know which is the better beat, And like if you're all caught in like, I want to be perfect, I want every beat to be this magical beat. Sometimes like you need a valley, you need a moment where things don't work so that you can kind of go to a high. And if you're trying to make a mountain out of what needs to be a valley, you're going to fuck up the next mountain because you're going to plateau it because now it's going to be two mountains in a row and there's not going to be an up and a down. So it's like, just you got to be in the moment. I think like one of the biggest things about comparison is it takes us out of the moment. It makes you not present to the moment because now you're going, well, this moment back here when I was like this time or this age or whatever, this was great. And then you're in that moment again. You're kind of in that similar situation. And then you're like, but this isn't as good. And it's like, yeah, but you don't always know. Like you don't know if that's setting up something great. But because you're like lacking presence in it, you're missing the opportunity for the next great thing to happen. And I love how you brought in the Napoleon Dynamite and the uncle who's living the glory days. Like that's a great example of these were glory days, and I get it. They were probably a great moment. I mean, this is a fictional story, but like there are these great moments in life. I have them. I look back and I go, oh man, that was a great moment. But if I live as though that was the great moment, and I got to try to keep creating that great moment, I lose out on the great moments that can happen now that might be greater. I was journaling this week actually, and I'm not sure if it was relatively in one of these last few days. And I was sitting here and I was just like writing, and I was like, this is the best time in my entire life. And I had this recognition. And I was like, the reason why I had that recognition is because it was the best time in my life, not in comparison to anything else. And nothing else mattered in that moment. And I was like, this is the best time in my life. And I was thinking about it. I was like, when I was like 23 and I was thinking of like, a great moment. I was like, that was the best moment in my life. And then this is the best moment in my life. And theoretically, I can have another best moment in my life. And they're going to happen in ways that I don't even expect. They're going to happen in like I'm just sitting here in my living room, writing, the sun's out, my cat's purring, and I'm just writing out something, and I'm like, this is a fucking awesome moment. And it's like, who gets to determine that? Like someone could go, well, that moment isn't that great. Like when you were doing this, that was way more exciting. It's like, yeah, but who gives a shit? Like to me, this moment is great. I feel great. I feel like I'm living my life as truthfully and authentically as I ever have. And the reason why, Evan, I felt like this moment this week, I had this recognition, it wasn't exciting. It was almost a nothing moment from an observation point of view, if someone was observing me. But I was like, man, the vision you had in your life has manifested. You feel good. you feel connected, you feel honest, you feel true, you know who you are. Like, it's not razzle dazzle, but this moment is special. This is a great moment. Like, a younger version of you, if they could know that this is where their life was going, they might be like, wow, fuck, I can't wait for that. That's fucking great. Because in a way, that's why it's better. It didn't have to be flashy for it to be a great moment. When I was younger, a lot of time my great moments had to be flashy for me to recognize them to be good. But now, as I'm older, I'm finding sometimes my more almost quote unquote basic moments are my best moments. And it's like, well, what's that about? But if you're living in comparison, I mean, you're fucked, right? Like, there's no way to acknowledge that. And it's a lot to do with gratitude and appreciation and just being connected. But when you're in the moment, this is the thing. The moment needs no comparison. It just needs to be. Yeah. And I think that's ultimately, like, I had 7 other things that I wanted to comment on, but ultimately, as long as I got that one out, that's all that matters.
Yeah, it's, you notice that great artists in whatever it is that they do, what so many of them communicate has something to do with, hey, look at this thing. Like, look at a moment like this. And just look at how incredible, amazing, awe-striking, just rich these things are. That, yeah, when we're in comparison, we might miss them. Not even, because you mentioned it's like, oh, well, like, look, the next big moment might be coming, right? And it's just like, well, the next big moment might be happening right now, right? Like, but because you're too busy thinking with some other idea in your head of what it's supposed to be, you're missing it. And if you could just click back in and see it and you go, oh, holy shit, something's fucking happening right now. And I was totally not paying attention to it. I was totally unaware of it. But then you become aware of it. I mean, and great artists, I think this is one of the big things that they communicate. Like, artists are making comments, commentary, observations, sometimes just exploding some kind of feeling, emotion, experience into whatever it is that they're doing, and it comes out and it's just like, yeah, like there's richness here, even in heartbreak. It's like, whoa, there's life. There's something so incredible that's happening right here and right now. And, just to bring in Alan Watts, because why not? Would it be one of our podcasts if we didn't talk about Alan Watts? He, in one of his lectures, I should go and searching out for it again because it's fantastic. But I remember him talking about how life is a celebration of itself. Like what I think it was probably a talk on, like, the meaning of life, and he kind of plays around and jokes around with that idea. It's like, it's like, well, maybe there's no purpose, right? It's a celebration of itself. That's its purpose. Like, it's because it is that it is, which is a kind of fucking mind bender. But it's and art is being so deeply connected with life, at least at its best. It's all about life. It's all about every little intimate detail of life, and particularly how we experience lives, and subjectively how we all, I don't know, how we all experience life and things like that. It is so connected, related, interested in that thing. I've always felt that, like, okay, well then art too is a celebration, even when it is about dark things that happen to us and tragedies and there's something that's a celebration in it too. You know, like it's not just you know, it's never just it's almost never just defeated. You know, there's something that's always hopeful, triumphant about great art. You know, like it's celebrating this thing that we're all a part of in a way.
Well, Evan, that was a little heady, I have to say. But I do think there is well, you know, something I was thinking about here as you're talking. Okay. Sometimes something can seem so important, and it's the point and it's the purpose, and you're totally driven towards it. And then you hit some point in your life where you realize it like was purposeless. It's like pointless. And then I think the common response is often, not always, probably often, like a form of depression or something. You're like, well, what's the point? If this doesn't matter, what matters? You know, all this, right? And I think there's a certain element of life that's like, yeah, that is almost the point of it all. It's like, it doesn't, like, it's pointless, and it's and it is like, and you find a point in something, and then all of a sudden that thing you thought was so important just is like, all of a sudden it's not important at all. And I think that the thing to keep in mind when you go, well, this was so important to me at one point, this was everything, this mattered to me so much, and now I don't care in the slightest, is that exactly, that's the point. It was so fucking on point for you at that time, and then now it's not. And like, moving on, you know, like, but now you're like, well, if I don't have that as my point, then what do I do? It's like, well, you're in a stage of the valley now. You're in the, you had a mountain to climb, you know, you climbed that mountain as far as you needed to. And then, you know, and there was nowhere else to go on that mountain. And you realize, well, there's nothing else to do here. And it's like, but I spent so much of my life, I invested so much to climb this mountain. It's like, yeah, you climbed it. Good job. You know what I mean? Or you climbed as much of it as you needed to know that you didn't want to climb anymore. And now you're on to some other thing. And it's like, just know there'll probably be another mountain, and you'll find point and purpose in that. And you'll think, oh, this is the one, this is the way. It's no, it isn't. But you know what? Enjoy, like, just enjoy it. Like, make it the point by all means. But like, it's not. I mean, that's the thing, I think, which is like, you know, comparison's funny too, because I think sometimes we find purpose in one thing, and then we're trying to find purpose in another thing, and we're comparing, oh, well, I felt more purpose when I was doing this thing than I do in purpose in doing this thing now, this new thing. And it's like, well, now that's why you can't make this the point, because you're comparing it to the other thing. Like, but remember, when you did the other thing, you didn't have anything to compare it to, so that's why it was the point. You know what I mean? Like, so this is the problem with getting older, is by the time you get a little bit older, you start to, there's probably 2 or 3 or 7 or 24 things that you found that are the point. And instead of making each one a new thing, you like, they get watered down and they get like diluted. And it's like, oh, you know, I already know what heartbreak is like. So you know what? I'm not going to really give, well, you gave your heart the first time. Why do you think it fucking mattered? Why do you think it works so much? You got to do it again. You know, die to the past, man. Like, you know what? Like the younger version of us that doesn't know, that isn't experienced, is often way more courageous than the older version of us. And I think an older person becoming courageous has to do some pretty cool shit, some pretty fucking ninja shit, you know, to become courageous again, because the younger version was just dumb. Like, the bottom line is, you just didn't know any better. You didn't, like, you're like, there's like that saying, it's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. It's like, yeah, that's great when you've never lost, but then people lose, and then they're like, well, you know, I'll just be safe. I'll be conservative now. It's like, yeah, your life's going to suck, because that's what conservative gets you a lot of the time when it comes to matters of the heart. You got to fucking go balls to the wall. You got to fucking throw it out there. You got to try it. Now, be a little smarter about it. Maybe don't do some things that are as naive or whatever, but don't be such a wimp about it. You know what I mean? Like, this is the thing. I'm speaking as much to my younger self as I am to anybody else out here. If I was talking to my younger self that used to be trepid and was being conservative and safe and like holding his, being not taking a risk, I would say just fucking go for it again, man. You went for it before and that was pretty exciting while it worked. And then it didn't work all of a sudden and now you're like, oh, that was a big mistake. It wasn't a mistake. It was great for like 95% of it. And then near the end, it fucking fell apart. So what? What'd you learn from the 5% that fell apart? Go do it again. Go do it with all your heart. Like quit living with the mistake of the past as though that's going to determine your whole life. And I would say that to anybody. And listen, I'm speaking from the heart here to our audience too, because I went through a real big depression. I share this multiple times on the podcast, but that depression was just me totally fucking caught on the fact that mountain that I had climbed before that moment was like done. And I hadn't made peace with that. And that's why I was depressed. I was in a valley trying to find a new form of connection and meaning and purpose. And what I would tell myself, the wisest version of me would tell me is like, dude, don't worry about it. That mountain's done. You climbed that mountain. You climbed as much of that mountain as you needed to climb. You're in a valley right now and you're about to find another mountain. It's coming. I'm telling you, it's coming. Just fucking keep on trekking along. And when you find that mountain, fucking go for it. Don't be a little wimp. Don't like sit there looking up at it and going, I guess I'll try. I guess I'll just be real safe this time. Just fucking climb it like you did before. You know what I mean? But I feel like comparison is what makes us do things like trepidly. It makes us like be, and we treat ourselves all of a sudden like without passion for life. And I guess all I can say about any of that, I'll pass it on to you a sec. I guess all I can say about that is like, I remembered a story when I was in my like deep depression, right? There was multiple moments where I came out of it. But when I was 21 or 19 or 21, somewhere around there, I think I was 21. I can't remember. Anyways, right around there, one of my very close and best friends at the time, I got a call and they're like, do you hear what happened to him? And it was like, he got hit by a car. He's dead. And it was like, holy shit. And I just remember thinking like, it could just all end. And I think one of the wake up calls that you kind of need to have is like, look, it could all just be over. So, you could die going for it or you could die playing it safe. And I think ultimately what I just decided, what I came to peace was like, well, you know what? You're going to die one way or the other. So why don't you just fucking die going for it instead of dying like wimping away, like hiding away from life. You know what I mean? But I feel like comparison convinces us that hiding away is the smart choice. And I think it's the dumb choice. I think it's the weak, wimpy choice. And I think that if you were just in this moment, if you just chose to live this moment as truthfully and fully as you could and wanted to, without being, you would go for it. That's what you would do. Because that's what children do. That's what young people do. So if you're making excuses about your past life in comparison to this life and justifying not going for it today because of some hurt or pain that happened in the past, then I think you're doing yourself a major disservice. That's opinion, but I do think it's true. And I think, honestly, I think you need to forgive yourself. You need to let go. You need to learn from the mistakes as best you can. I think you just need to fucking go balls to the wall, all out one more time. And then if that doesn't work, then you do it one more time. And then you just do it one more time. That's it.
Well, I think that there's been no shortage of wisdom throughout the ages of humanity that has commented on this cycle of death and rebirth. And it's not something that necessarily just means like, no, it's just like you live and then you die, and then whatever happens after that, who knows, and I'm not here to necessarily comment on anything like that, but I think that it's also recognition but that's something that you go through within your life, throughout the course of your life. There's death and there's a rebirth, and there's a death and there's a rebirth, there's a death and there's a rebirth, and that's not making any kind of metaphysical claim. I think that that's a very natural claim to make. Just look at the seasons.
Yeah.
Look at the seasons. Like every year we are treated to watching that cycle occur. We see that whole thing playing out in front of us, and I believe that we do the exact same things in our life. Things die, things in the past, they die, but then there's life that comes out of it. There's something new that's on its way, right? And in many ways, the fall and the winter are prepping the way for the spring and the summer, right? But even, like, how much do I love going for a hike in the fall with the colors that you just don't get the kind of colors in any other season than you do in the fall. It's completely unique. I mean, you get lots of beautiful colors in the spring like we are right now, and I'm loving that too, but it's different. It's different. Even in the winter, like there's something about going for like a walk by myself or a hike and like in the woods, and there's a kind of stillness, and the leaves aren't on the trees. They're like sculptures, they're like these glass sculptures, and there's that coolness, that bite to the air, and there's something that's so soulful about the whole thing, and I'm just like, and I'm enjoying it, right? Even though it's like, yeah, there's moments in the wintertime where I'm just like, oh man, I could use some warmth, I could use some light again, but that's an important thing too, right? Like there's something important about, okay, we're going to spend some time where things are a little bit darker, where things are a little bit colder here, right? Because there's something valuable happening, right? And it makes that rebirth season that's coming, just it gives it it gives it its importance too, right? Like those seasons aren't particularly notable unless we have them in comparison to the others, right? Like if it was just warm, I mean, and some places are, I suppose. There are places that are just warm all the time, and I was just in Mexico this past winter, and I met so many people from Mexico who would love to come to Canada because they're just like, I'm so tired of the heat. Like people are just so sick of the heat, and it's just warm all the time. And they're like, I want to see the snow. I want to see like these seasons, because we don't get these seasons like that, right? Like, yeah, there can sometimes be, they're wet. Like it always plays out in some kind of fashion. But anyhow, that cycle of death and rebirth, and we do the same things, but I think that we resist the death of things, right? Because it's like we're afraid that rebirth isn't going to happen. It's like we're afraid that spring isn't going to come if this thing dies. But part of the thing that actually keeps the thing from coming is because you're hanging on to the old thing. You're hanging on to your fall, you're hanging on to your winter, right? And it's just like, just let it go. Yeah. Let it go, and trust that thing's coming, and just be like know that it's on its way, just as sure as the spring is coming, like so is yours.
Yeah. One thing I love where this is gone, and I think there's something about kind of this cycle, this seasonal thing. Like we do have the law of seasons in this. One of our artists, what do we call them? Laws. Yeah, it's one of our artist laws. Yeah, so we have these laws that we haven't actually talked about a lot, but we call it the law of seasons in artistry or creativity, because things have to go through a process and then they end and something else happens. You know what? I was thinking about some of my relationships that I've had, friendships and just relationships with family members and whatever that have evolved over the years. And it's like, yeah, like we've gone through seasons, like things have died in a sense. They aren't what they used to be. And now they're this new thing, and you kind of have to let it go. And I think sometimes when people think of a relationship going through a winter or a fall, like a dying period, they think they're going to lose the relationship. It doesn't mean you're going to lose the relationship. It means that sometimes you will, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's okay. Let it be. But sometimes also you're going to allow that relationship to be born again into something new. It's going to become a newer, evolved version of whatever it needs to be. And if you hang on to the way that it was, well, I think that's why a lot of people end up kind of splitting up as friends, because the relationship needs to evolve for it to actually work. But because they won't let it evolve, they can't make amends with that, and then they split ways. Whereas, like, I think part of the cycle of the metaphorical death is acceptance and not resistance, is that allow things not to be what they once were. Allow them to be something new. And, this comes everywhere. It's like the law of seasons in like, even in an acting scene is like every moment in an acting scene is a whole season. It's like, let it live, let it die, let it be born, let it happen, let it die, let it be born, let it happen, let it die. And you could go through several seasons within a scene. It's just like, but if you try to go, oh, we're in a good moment, let's just hang on to this moment. Hang on. It's like, no, it's just going to slowly die and fade away into like something weird. You know what I mean? Just like let it happen. The moment ends and then you move on to the new thing, and I think what's interesting about this conversation for me at this point is that when you're hanging on to kind of, you went through a season in your life, like you went through a season, you're like, well, that season was really good. And then you move on to another season. And if you compare the new season you're in to the last season, you get caught in what I would almost call a, what's the word when you're caught between heaven and hell? Limbo? Yeah, well, it's like limbo, but it's like purgatory. You're in purgatory. You're in like a kind of but limbo. You're like in this area of like, you're not this, you're not that. You're just like, where am I going? And there's this like lost period, right? And when you resist letting something go, you get caught in the lost period. The fastest way to get out of a lost period, a period of purgatory or limbo or maybe even depression, is just let go of this thing that seemed to matter. Let it go. Let it just be. And I think it's very scary to be without anything for a little bit. But I don't know if you ever heard the story of, like, it's not a story, it's more of an adage, I don't know, like an idea. But it's like you're on a cliff and all of a sudden you fall off the cliff and you grab on, and then you're grabbing onto that cliff and you're falling and you're grabbing, but you realize that the cliff that you're hanging on to is not even attached to anything. It's just like you and the cliff are falling, and you could just let go of it because it's not getting you. Like you're not, there's nothing you're hanging on to. Whatever you're hanging on to is already broken away, but you're clinging to it like it's some type of life raft, like it's going to save you. And all it's doing is it's just taking you away from wherever you're meant to land, wherever you're meant to be. And you need to accept that a moment passes, a time in life passes, and then you're on to the new one. And if you can embrace the new one, you can realize that the new one might even be better. But even, that is irrelevant. It doesn't even matter if it's better. It is, Yeah, so I feel like that's a big part of this. I feel like that's a big part of what we're talking about here. Evan and I were hiking up the mountain, and there's this one point, we got this beautiful spot. And we were making a joke. I don't know, we were talking about something, and it's like, oh, it's like I just hiked all the way up here. And it's like irrelevant. Like, like just enjoy this moment. Like, who cares? Like, I think there's this kind of like, we almost, when we're in comparison, we're almost like too focused on what was happening. It's like, let this happen. Like, it's irrelevant what was happening in a sense. Like, but by focusing on what's happening or what happened, you're missing what's happening. And I feel like a lot of us are just caught in this cycle of we're constantly just focused on what happened. And then how does that relate to now? And it's like, why don't you just be now? Or what's yeah, or they're in what's next. And I think that just creates a lot of worry and anxiety, right? And yeah, and it's a comparison. It's a comparison to like, oh, I'm here now, but what's next? I'm here now, but what's next? And it's like, just let this moment exist. And then you know what? You'll be in what's next. And all of a sudden, let it exist. You know? I don't know. Maybe there's something about we're always trying to like watch out for danger. Maybe that's a big part of it. Maybe we're always just trying to protect ourselves from something. But I think there has to be a certain point where you have to realize that all this fancy protection work you're doing is actually, it's not protecting you at all. It's not doing anything. All it's doing is watering down your life experience. And I don't know, man. I mean, I feel like we're kind of coming to an end. Yeah. All right. So we're coming to an end, and Evan got a nice beer for us, so I'll let him share.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this was just what I had on hand before we started recording, and this is from a brewery very close to us here on the beautiful Sunshine Coast in British Columbia, and this is called the Easy Living Pilsner from the 101 Brew House and Distillery. I always forget that. They're also a distillery. They're also making spirits and stuff over there. So yeah, I mean, this is I'm pretty sure we've had this one on here before, and it's it's great. It's a very nice pilsner. It's cool. It's crisp. It's refreshing. It's a pilsner, man. Yeah. It's a pilsner. Does the job. You got any comments on it?
It's good.
All right.
You got something to wrap up?
Sure. I'll find something to say here. It's getting late. Just in what the last your last sort of soapbox there, Brandon, and it got me thinking about, again, like why we do hang on to these ideas of who we want to be or who we were, right? Both of them can be mistaken, right? These preconceived notions of who we are. And yeah, like it can be really hard to let that go. Stuff with identity, identities are a really tricky thing that we all deal with as human beings. And I think that death process of that letting go, those letting go seasons and times in our life, like there's, we were talking about questions a lot in our last podcast or the one before, like, because there's a question that comes with that situation, whether we're aware of it or not. And that question is something like, well, who would I be? Who am I if I'm not this thing? Or if I don't have this thing? If I'm not this person? Then who am I? Right? That can be really scary, depending on how much time and how tightly we've become, we're holding on to something. It can feel like it's like it might actually even feel like you'll die. It can actually come with that feeling. And the thing is that like you like that is like you're already the thing is typically already dead. It's like that person has already died, and it's really just, you have to acknowledge that is dead. Like it's already, you hanging on to it is like hanging on to a corpse, like, and you're dragging this thing around with you, and it's just like, it's already dead. Just because you're already asking this question, just because something's already occurred that's brought you to this place, has just shown you so concretely that it's gone, right? This thing is, or at least it's gone in the way that you've known it. There might be something that it's coming back as, right? Or that it's turning into, right? Like, it's not like it's completely removed from your life and everything. It's deeply tied to it. But until you can allow that, and yeah, there might even be a grieving process that you have to go through. Grief is a part of life, but grief is also, when grief is allowed, it can bring us to love in some kind of way. It can bring us to some kind of love that we have in our life, maybe one that we forgot about, that never actually died, that we've been carrying around with us. Or it might draw us to a new one entirely, something completely fresh, right? But we just don't know until we let the thing go, right? And we only really know who we are, again, like, in the moment. It's only, as I remember from a quote from Eckhart Tolle, it's like, it is only in the now that we are truly who we are, and that, in fact, it's only in the now that we are truly ourselves, right? And that nothing of value is actually lost when we let those things go. In fact, it just opens the floor for the real you to step up. So, yeah, man, this has been a cool conversation.
It has been a cool conversation. I'm thinking there's a lot of things that get put on us when we're young about, how we should be, the way we should think, what we should do, all of that. And I think there's a certain amount of like that needs to kind of like die off as you get older. Like, you kind of like the reason why you were given a lot of that stuff was just to, like, you need to be a functional human being in a very complex society. And so there's a lot of things that, we get passed along from our parents and teachers, coaches, whatever, and friends and everybody. But it's like, these things are just kind of there to help you navigate, which is a very complex and fast moving, complicated world. But eventually what is initially fast-paced, complicated, and all of that, it just, eventually it's not that complicated anymore. It actually gets just simple. It's like you just start to master the skills of it. You kind of get it figured out. But you still have these like lingering things that you were presented with as a kid, where it's like, this is what you do. This is what a good life is. This is how you're supposed to be. These are the rules. And it's like, some of that stuff has to just die away, because you can't be free of it, and you're like still in the program. And the program was not designed to hurt you. The program was designed to keep you alive, to keep you safe, to help you be functional. But I think from an artist point of view, I think that's what a lot of artists are actually trying to do, is they're trying to like shed the programming and the rigid structures. And I mean, if you think about it, like in our generation, we grew up to some degree in a industrial revolution, or near the end of the industrial revolution, and now we're in a technocracy. Now things are kind of, or at least we're in the beginning of a technocracy. So there's things that we're learning about. This is how you live in an industrial world. This is how you live in a technocracy. This is how you live in these types of worlds. This is how you live in a tribe, it might be, right? It's the same idea. The thing is that you eventually kind of get a handle on all of that, and it's like, this isn't how you live. This is just how people manage to get by in it. Like, this isn't the way. This is a way. And this is what my parents did. This is what people in my school did. It doesn't mean that that's the right way. It just means it was a way and it kind of worked. But it, like, at a certain point, you find a lot of stuff doesn't work anymore. And when you hang on to it, it's like, if you just let this go, you would actually be free to find a much better option. But because you're like clinging to this thing, you're not free. You can't, you have no flexibility anymore, and, your parents' fears become your fears. And you might realize, well, what they were scared of, I don't have to be scared of anymore. There's lots of things like that. This is these things that kind of like, and I think the confusion is you think that's you. It's not you. And one thing I always try to remind myself of is I'm not Brandon. I'm not this body. I'm the thing. I'm the energy animating this body. I'm the spirit or soul or energy that's animating what people call Brandon. And I'm playing the role of Brandon. But I'm the thing inside of me, and the thing inside of me can do anything. It doesn't have to live by the bounds of what Brandon is, right? But Brandon has lived a life, and sometimes it just kind of conforms to that life. But it's like, and when I say conforms, it conforms to the comparison of what that life has been. I'll share a story just to end this podcast from my perspective, and this was a good one for me, and maybe someone on the other side will get something out of it. When I was in high school, when I was a kid, I was bullied a lot, and my parents were never around, so I was neglected often, and I just didn't have a lot of attention, and so I lacked some social skills in certain ways, and I didn't know how to stand up for myself. I didn't have very good boundaries, and and so I was kind of bullied, and I was just very diminished. I was like kind of quiet and whatever. And then this one summer, I went away, and there's all these kids from different places in the world. And a bunch of kids were from Hawaii and other kids from other places and the States and just different places that I was from. And they all looked at me like I was they didn't look at me like the way kids at my school looked at me. They looked at me like I just had options. And I just realized, you know what? I don't have to be who the world has treated me as. I can be whatever I want. And then I just started opening up. I started making jokes, and they're like, oh, you're super funny and blah, 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 and you're creative and whatever. And then the weirdest thing is I became this really charismatic, popular kid. All of a sudden, kids wanted to hang out with me. I was the cool kid. And I was like, this is so weird. Was that I could be whatever I want to be. But the reason why I was stuck in this small version of myself was because I was conforming to how the world was treating me and how it was seeing me. So I know we didn't really get into this, but I think you have to, don't compare yourself to how the world has treated you in the past. The world will, what I learned when I was 16, because I totally transformed my life, and most people would never think that I was bullied. They're so surprised by it when they hear it. The thing is I transformed my life. What I'm saying is that the world will accept you how you present yourself. But I think the biggest issue that most people struggle with is they present themselves based on how the world has treated them, and the world continues to treat them based on how they presented themselves before, and they live in a cycle. So if you could just decide, hey, this is how I want to be, this is how I'm going to present myself. What I found is most people will accept you how you present yourself. So you can decide that in the moment. You can just say, hey, you know what? From now on, I'm having fun. From now on, I'm doing this. From now on, I'm doing that. From now on, I'm not going to be that way anymore. I'm going to be this way. And the world will accept it. We only do often what we're told we're supposed to do. So if you tell us, hey, I'm weak and I'm shy and I'm scared, we all go, okay, you're weak or shy, you're scared. Okay, that's how I treat you. But if you go, I'm courageous, I'm bold, I'm out there, I'm wild, people go, okay, that's what you are. Okay, we'll treat you that way. So recognize that you're not who you think you are. You're who you have played the presentation of over and over again. And you can just stop. That's what I found out. And then I just changed my life. And I've done that a few times in my life where I had to go, okay, you know what, Brandon? We fucking hit a wall. We got to reinvent ourselves again a little bit. We got to try again. We've gone down a spiral somewhere here. It went a little bit off. Let's reevaluate, let's try this again. And I found that, you know what? the people who've known you for a long time, it will be a little bit harder to get them to kind of come along because they kind of know you the way they've seen you a lot. But the new people are very, very willing to treat you how you present yourself. And what you kind of got to do is you got to kind of convince yourself that you're the new person you're presenting yourself as. And I found that the people who've known you for a long time, who kind of seen you in the old way, they eventually just start to come along. But it takes them a little bit longer. So just be patient. And and that I guess the final way I would say this is just decide in this moment, who do you want to be right now? And start being that. And then you start seeing pretty magical shit happens.
Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.